Hi guys, this is Pestily and welcome to my PC building video. In this video, I'm actually going to cover all the parts that I put into my computer, how I built it, little tips and tricks in building a PC if you've never done it before, and it'll be more of like an overview of everything that I did. If you want to check out the entire video, I've made a highlight on my Twitch and as a VOD. It goes for about 2.5 hours and you'll see all the banter and the talking throughout the whole thing, a little bit of the troubleshooting that we ran into. And that pretty much covers everything that will be in this video and where you can see the full one. The one thing I do want to do before I go any further is I want to quickly shout out Corsair and Gigabyte. They came to the party with this one. I reached out to both Corsair and Gigabyte asking if they wanted to be involved in me building my dream PC. And Corsair came in with a case, RAM, all-in-one cooler, and a power supply. And Gigabyte gave me pretty much the best motherboard on the market. So I'm really wrapped with that. And I'll go into more details about these parts as we go through the build. So first up, we've got the case. It's a 678C Corsair case. Now, this isn't the most extravagant case on the market. I specifically wanted this case because it's a very slim and sleek design, which isn't too over the top. But I also wanted to be kind of smaller and not as big as other cases because I'm going to be using this computer throughout my travels in Europe as well. And so I wanted something that can be a little bit more compact instead of having like a full massive tower case. Now, if you're looking to buy a case, you kind of want to look at stuff like what can it hold, if it's a mid or a full-size case, and what fans it comes with. There's some really basic designs out there, and there's some really extravagant ones, and it comes down to what you want to do. There are cases now that have enough room for 2 computers in there, if you're doing a dual PC setup. My only stress with that would probably be based on the heating requirements, or the cooling requirements to get a case cool enough to run 2 what I would consider pretty full-on computers inside the one case. Now, I didn't go down that path. I actually wanted to stick with a single PC setup for now, and so this is the case that I selected for that. Now, moving over to the motherboard for this computer, I am using an Intel processor, so I selected to go with the Gigabyte Aorus Xtreme motherboard. This was provided by Gigabyte, and it's about an $850 Australian for the motherboard, which I think in US would be around $500 US. It's an amazing motherboard. It has so many overclocking features, the troubleshooting features on it. It is like, and you can tell from the box, it is a massive, massive motherboard. It has all the bits and tricks that you could ever want, all the cable adapters for any sort of tweaking and modding of a computer with the case as well as overclocking. Now, the other day I heard someone say you should spend the same amount of money on your motherboard as you do your CPU, and I think it's not a bad way of judging it. If you are going to buy a unlocked processor and you do want to overclock computers, you're going to need to spend a little bit more on a motherboard that has the features and the ability to tweak out every single like power setting and to get the maximum out of your overclocking. Now, if you're not into overclocking at all, you don't need to spend that kind of money. You can just save a little bit there and just buy more of a basic motherboard that doesn't have all those extra features. And there's no real major issue with that. Things though I would point out with a motherboard is you want to have it so it can support whatever type of RAM you want to have, so the megahertz on the RAM, as well as now these days M2 drives are becoming increasingly popular, and if you want to buy an M2 drive, I personally use 2. This motherboard holds 3. I would definitely suggest you have enough slots of M2 drives on your motherboard so you can actually have as many hard drives as you like. We're moving away more and more from the SATA hard drives these days, and the M2 drives and the solid state drives are amazingly good, and they're coming a lot cheaper. And I do put 2 in this computer, which you'll see, but it's definitely worth investing in those if you're going to go with that top-end gaming PC. The things that a hard drive actually does a lot of effect on is the ability you can load stuff and also transfer stuff. So if you're loading into Windows, loading into a game, those loading screens are a lot shorter. And there's a lot of YouTube videos out there that show the difference in loading speed on an M2 drive, SATA drive, and a solid state. So it's definitely worth checking out those videos if you're really interested in buying those kind of hard drives. Now, when it comes to motherboards, I also like to buy motherboards these days that have Wi-Fi built into them and Bluetooth built into them. They're becoming more and more popular, but it's really frustrating when you buy a motherboard and you're like, oh sweet, now I want to get on the network, and you don't have that Wi-Fi capability. These days, most motherboards that are a little bit more expensive do have it included, but the budget ones won't. But I always spend that extra $50 or $100 to get all these extra little features like the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth, because it saves me having to put another card into the actual computer itself, as well as a USB dongle for the Bluetooth. So now what we've got here is the CPU I decided to put into my new Epic Gaming PC, which is the i9-9900K. The K means it's unlocked and you can overclock it if you wish. I haven't currently overclocked mine, and I'll explain more about that later. Now, the selection of the processor, it did come down to, did I want to spend the extra money between the 9700 and the 9900? The big difference is I do a lot of video editing and rendering, and the i9 has the best power for rendering videos, and with the amount of YouTube editing I do, and obviously I do streaming as well, I want to have the best CPU capable for that. Now, when you do finally get the CPU out of one of these containers, I don't know what shape it is, it's like a hexagon thingy-majiggy. Once you do get it out, it's a very small CPU. Oh, it's not actually too small compared to like ones in the past, but it's a pretty small CPU, and you do not want to damage any of the pins on the CPU. Once you do it, warranty void. You've just wasted yourself $800. So you got to be super careful. When you open up the latch on the motherboard, it'll have that plastic little cap over the protecting the actual motherboard CPU slot. That opens up. You put the CPU in. You'll see a little, two little like arrows in the corner of the CPU, as well as on the there's little locking like little cutouts on the sides of the CPU that can only go one way into the motherboard. So you line all that up so you make sure you got it all the right way, and then you place it down there. Once you've got it in the actual slot, you don't actually have to remove that plastic cover. When you actually put the lock down on the actual lever, when you lock it all the way down, the plastic will just pop off, and you won't have to worry about that bit there, and it just comes straight off. So it's nice and easy for that part there. This used to be a lot harder. When you used to put a CPU in, it was a lot more stressful. You'd put in the CPU, and then when you chuck the fan on, you'd be putting your whole body weight on top of a screwdriver to try and get the latch over the actual fan, and the fan locked onto the motherboard. That's all changed. It's a lot easier now, and it's a lot less stress. Now, generally when I put computers together, I try and put as much into the motherboard before I actually put it into the case, because it just makes it a lot easier, because you don't have to try and lean over a case to get all these things in. And this is just me showing an example of back in the day when we were trying to put fans on with the old CPU fans, and it was crazy time. Alright, so now we're moving over to the RAM. Now, for my computer, I use the Corsair Dominator RAM. This is the new RAM out. There's a 64 gigabyte pack that I received from Corsair, and it has a 3000 megahertz speed, or it's speed rated at that, and very low latency. Now, people go, why the hell would you want 64 gig of RAM? And it comes back to that whole, I'm going to be doing all my editing and rendering on this computer at the same time as doing all my gaming. So, not literally at the same time as I'll be gaming and rendering, but I'll be doing all my editing on this one PC. So I'm no longer going to be using that 2 PC setup. I used to use a Threadripper computer with 32 gig of RAM, and now I just want to have it all in the one to save a lot of hassle with 2 PC setups. Now, something to note with RAM, a lot of people think, oh, you just got to have the fastest speed possible, and people will try and go out and buy 38 megahertz RAM and all that kind of stuff. The thing about it is, the way I try to explain it is, RAM is kind of like a highway, right? So you're trying to get the information down a highway, or the cars are trying to get down the highway, and the megahertz is how many lanes it has, but the actual latency is the speed limit. So if you've got a low latency RAM, it actually moves a lot faster, and it's like saying you can get more information down that highway faster, but you don't have as many lanes. So a 3000 megahertz RAM doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be slower RAM than a, say, 3800 megahertz RAM, because the actual speed limit or the latency will be really high on those higher megahertz RAMs. And that's where you see those numbers like 1515, 1536, or you might see like 1517, 1735. Those numbers are actually the milliseconds with the information going back and forth. So if you are actually going to buy a new RAM, I would actually suggest going out and doing a little bit of research on this. There are calculators out there that actually tell you which RAM is the best bang for buck and stuff like that. And I didn't actually even understand a lot of this stuff until about 12 months ago when I bought my computer before this one. And I was buying RAM. I actually didn't really understand what the hell was going on. Like, what should I be buying with RAM? Because RAM is actually really expensive. At one stage, RAM was really cheap. I was actually really excited, and then obviously the the Bitcoin mining thing craze kicked in and RAM was important again, and then it got expensive. So yeah. So anyway, with RAM, putting it into a computer, it only goes in one way. It's obvious where it goes. There's usually the slots on the motherboard. If you have 2 sticks, you want to have there'll be a gap between them. So the way the banks kind of work is it should be like a 1 and 1 or a 0 and 0, something like that. You should be able to see it on that. But I would just check the motherboard manual, little instruction, and it will tell you if you've only got 2 sticks, which slots to put them into. If you've got 4 and there's only 4 slots, it makes it really simple. You can put different speeds of RAM and all that into the same motherboard, but it will get clocked down at the slower speed. So whatever the slower rating is, all the RAM will work at that generally. And so if you are going to try and do that to get extra RAM in there, just take note of that and make sure you've got the same speed sticks in the 1 and 1 and the 0 and 0, which you'll read that in the motherboard actual pamphlet thing. So, or you can actually read it on the motherboard, which sticks are lined up and matched up together, banked together. So now we're moving over to our M2 drives. Now these are your solid state drives. You can see my trusty helper mod Pato on the right hand side there. M2 drives are pretty much a new craze when it comes to hard drives, but they are so amazing. I could turn my computer off and boot her up, and it'll be in Windows in about 7 seconds. If I are loading up games, all happens super fast. And in a game where I play like Escape from Tarkov, loading screens can actually take a while, and if you have that as fast solid state drives, it will make a big difference. I always recommend putting your games on a solid state drive, just for overall, it'll make your game experience better. Understandably though, they are very expensive for how much space you get. They are dropping in price rapidly, and you can get slightly older M2 drives. By what I mean by older is like the last year's model, and they'll still be really, really fast and have lots of space, and they'll be like probably 2/3 of the price. So I have the Samsung 970 Evo Pluses in this one. I've got 1 terabyte and a 500 gig. The 500 gig will be Windows, where I'll have my Adobe installed, all my programs, like, whatever I'm going to be using, Discord and, Office, if I have that installed. I don't have Office anymore. I just use Google Docs and Google Drive. But anyway, and then I've got my 1 terabyte, and that's where I chuck all my games. Any of the recordings from my stream, they all go on that 1 terabyte. And then I can run everything from there. The speed on these things are insane. I can't stress how much they're like life-changing. They just take so much time away from sitting on loading screens, and you can actually enjoy what you're doing, and they make a big difference. But they are expensive. So like I said, I'm making my dream PC here, so I'm gonna get the best I can at the time. Now, when you are installing these, some motherboards will just have them openly exposed. Other motherboards will have little heat shields that go on top. There are some tricks to these. There's sometimes little screws that you got to try and find. Sometimes the actual screws for the M2 drive that hold them in place will be already inside the actual like the screw spot on the motherboard, and then other times you'll have them in little plastic slips in the motherboard box. So it can get kind of annoying trying to find these little tiny screws to put these hard drives in. Something to note, which I almost stuffed up here, but I realized a bit later on, was underneath these heat shields, there are actually like heat pads, and they had plastic on them. So I actually would have had these plastic melting to the hard drive, but I noticed it and I fixed that up. So make sure if you do have one of those heat shields, check underneath the heat shield. They might have a little plastic slip you need to pull off. It was like a little sticky like heat pad that I need to put on. The rest on top of the hard drive to disperse the heat through the heat shield. So just be wary of that. But yeah, so that's pretty much everything I can cover for these hard drives. There's more than one brand, but I generally just like the Samsung ones. I've never had any major issues. I think out of the 6 or 7 hard drives I've got now over all my computers, one of them died. I contacted Samsung and sent it back, and they had me a new one pretty much 2 or 3 weeks later. They sent me the newer model as a warranty because they just didn't have the older model in stock. So worked out quite well there. But you don't want hard drives to die on you, of course, but sometimes they do. And that's how small they are. They are bloody tiny. So once you've got all this stuff installed into your motherboard, so I've got the CPU on, I've got the RAM in there, I've got the hard drives in there, that's when I put it inside the case. Now, every case is different, and they generally do line up pretty well. Getting the actual motherboard in is usually pretty straightforward. This motherboard already came with a, it's like the the connector plug shield already on it. I can't remember what it's called exactly, but that will go on the back of the case. It was already there, so it was nice and easy to slot that straight in. Things that you will notice in cases though, and it depends on the size of the case, is how much room you have for cabling and everything around it. Now, I'm not the biggest nut about having everything super neat and tidy, but my mod Pato is. So thanks to him, we made sure everything was nice and neat. Now, as you can see here, there's a little top cover on my case that's sliding off. Before you put a computer together inside a case, I highly suggest taking off every panel you can, which we already took off most of the panels, but I forgot to take off that top one. The top one on this case actually just sits there. It doesn't actually screw in. And there's also a mesh shield there to stop dust coming in. You can take a lot of the covers off cases, sometimes the front panels as well, and it will make life a lot easier. So remove all those panels, get everything nice and easy to access everything, because you're going to be putting cabling through everywhere, and it can be quite hectic. So as you see here, as I go to put the motherboard in, I don't really show it very well here, but there is in the center of a motherboard, there's like usually a hole, and there's always this like one pin that's already on a case that's like hard welded into a case, and you get that pin to go through that hole, and that's really where your motherboard should be lining up. And then from there you can actually screw in the rest of all your screws and that. So that's kind of like a bit of a safety gate to make sure you don't like put it in the wrong spot and then scratch the shit out of your motherboard. I know this might be like me just going over the real basic stuff, but for people that haven't built a computer before, hopefully you'll be able to learn a fair bit from this. Now, once you've got the actual motherboard in there, there'll be the screws. You just screw them in to like all the little, you'll see like little heat circle shield pads. That's where you should be putting, and static, they're like static pads. Around the outside of the motherboard, you'll screw all those in, and then it'll be secured nice and tight into your case. So what I'm about to do here, once I've got the motherboard in, on the back of the case, there is like a gazillion cables, which is all like your power cables and all that. I'm unscrewing that. Well, it's actually had a cable tie on it. I cut the cable tie so I can get access to be able to move these cables around, so I can make it all nice and neat once we start plugging that bit in. But once your motherboard is in, you've got it nice and secure, you can move on to putting in the all-in-one cooler. Oh, that's what I've got. And, well, that was fun for this one. So the all-in-one cooler that I selected for my computer was the H150i Pro, which was also provided by Corsair. This is a really big 360mm all-in-one cooler, but it works really well. And the I on anything Corsair product means it's got like the intelligence side of things, and it means you can have the programs within Windows to change fans and LEDs and all that cool stuff. So it actually works really well. If you want to overclock, you can turn fans up, you can manage the fans, you can have it on a quiet mode, a high mode, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a really good cooler for that, and it comes with everything you ever possibly need. There is 3 fans, all the adapters, and the radiator, and obviously the head of the cooler that goes on the CPU. So the beauty of an all-in-one cooler is everything comes complete, and you just whack it on the CPU, chuck it in the case, and you're good to go as long as the power's all plugged in, etc. The unbeautiful thing, though, is the fact that you have a Twitch chat talking to you, telling you which way all the fans should be blowing. And oh my god, it took more time to get everyone on the same page of which way a fan should blow into a case and out of a case. It really doesn't matter in the end of the day. If you've got some fans going out, some fans going in, if you've got that vacuum pulling all the air through, it's what, you know, it's how it all works. So if you have everything going in, which some people are saying it just doesn't make the vacuum. If you have it all going out, there's nowhere for the air to come in. So just have it somewhere where it's coming in, somewhere it's going out, and you'll be happy with that. Now, with all-in-one coolers, there is a lot of parts. With this one, they generally have a different bracket that will go for either the Threadripper CPUs or the Intel CPUs, and you just need to look at the instruction manual and figure out which one's for which. There'll be 3 fans and then a radiator, and then depending on how you want to set it up, you put it into your case. Now, you can have a radiator at the front or at the top, as long as it fits, that's all good. And just take note of how you want to mount all your fans to the radiator. For this, I actually mounted mine directly onto the radiator from the back, and they will suck the air through the radiator, and then I would mount the radiator onto the front of my case. Now, cases will vary on how much space they have, and you need to work out where you can fit your radiator in what formation of your fans. If you want to have it blowing the air out from inside the case through your radiator, or suck it in like I've done. The reason why I sucked it in was the air on the outside of the case is cooler than the air on the inside, and so I wanted to have the coolest air coming through my radiator that cools the CPU. And then I'll have the other fans inside the case sucking the air out, either the top or the back. Now, other things to note with this is this case has a control board for all the LEDs and RGB stuff, and also the fans. And so you need to locate where the control boards are and be able to plug into them. With this one, the CPU also has, the CPU block for the fan has a power cable and a USB like attachment cable that goes out towards those control blocks, and you need to work out the configuration so you're making sure you're having your fans go faster when your CPU is getting hotter. If you don't connect it all up properly, there won't be that automatic control, and you might run the risk of your fans not cranking up the speed when required. So just something to take note on there. But it's all pretty straightforward depending on how many fans you want to have in your case. If you want to go full extreme, it can get quite crazy, the cabling. And so once you have all your 3 fans on, or once I got my 3 fans on, I put it on the inside of the case at the front, and I screwed it in from the front of the case there. There was no other way I could really fit this kind of size radiator in the case without doing it this way, without putting it up the top, and I didn't want to do it that way. So once the radiator was screwed into the front, then I can actually start putting in all the block onto the CPU, and and get it all cranking that way. Now, depending on the cooler, sometimes you need to put a back plate behind the CPU to put the cooler or the head on to be able to screw it in. So just to take note of that. Each one will have a different bracket, each type of CPU socket set, and each motherboard. So they come all included in the all-in-one cooler. You just need to figure out which one it is. You might want to spin the head of the cooler around so you can actually get Corsair facing the right way, or whatever brand you've got, and have it facing all nice and neat. Then you try your best to not kink the cabling as well. Once you've got it all in place, it's pretty straightforward. You just screw in the screws onto the top of each of the 4 corners. If you've got a thread ripper, you need to do it in the right order, and in the right order to the right tension. And they come with like a tension like ratchet thing, which works really well. But it's just something to take note of if you are going down the thread ripper path. But the Intel is all pretty straightforward. You just do it to you want it tight, but not too tight. Like tight enough, tight, but not too tight. Yeah, so you'll figure it out. So once you've got them all screwed in, you'll have the power cable and the USB cable and all that. One will plug into the head of the block bit, and then sometimes they come like coming out like that, like these ones are. So I've had other ones where you plug them straight into it from the external, and then other ones for like this one that's already plugged in, you need to just plug it out. So cable management is a big thing for a lot of people. Just put it down the back of the case. You can worry about plugging these in later. Just make sure you do plug them in. I generally put all my cables in right at the end all together. So now it's Christmas time and the big mother truck has come out. This is a 2080 Ti. This is the Aorus Xtreme. This is the best graphics card that Gigabyte has to offer with the 2080 Ti, and I am super excited to have it. It's an absolute beast. Inside the box, it comes with a spacer thing that holds it from being too heavy, as well as it will have a CD for drivers, but I generally just get my drivers straight from the NVIDIA website. And obviously the graphics card will be in there. So once you do rip all out of the box, open her up, and you can start getting inside the candy cane tree house of adventures. So as you can see here, I am putting together the spacer. This is like a little just, I don't know the way to best way. It's like a lever that kind of holds up the graphics card from being too heavy inside the case. It's pretty cool to chuck that together and have that. I've never seen one of these before until I saw the 2080s, but I've heard there's been stress on graphics cards to be held up because of the weight of how big they are. Now, going over to the graphic card itself, these things are an absolute beast. They're the best on the market at the moment. They are very expensive, and the reason why I went with a 2080 Ti was, well, I wanted to have the best computer I could possibly put together as my dream PC, but the previous graphics card was a 1080 Ti, and it was an absolute weapon of a graphics card, and I could quite easily use a 1080 Ti. This one actually in the screen at the moment is I think a 980, but I could actually use the 1080 Ti for all the gaming and be quite happy with that. I wouldn't have any worries. The speed and the quality difference in these graphics cards, it's about 20 to 30% better performance out of a 2080 Ti. And when you're talking about 2,000 Australian dollars to get 30% increased performance, that's not really worth it. But I wanted to have a 20 series graphics card because the NVEC codecs on OBS and for rendering are absolutely amazing on the 20 series graphics cards. So you don't need to have a 2080 Ti, but a 2060 would actually do a really great job with encoding and decoding for when you do streaming. So if you are thinking about putting a computer together, I would highly suggest avoiding getting a 10 series and getting a 20 series. So if you want to get, let's say, a secondhand 1080 Ti, I'd actually suggest if you can get the equivalent money's worth in a 2060, 2070 or something like that, if you're going down the streaming path, it would totally be worth it. The rendering quality, it's quite a step up, and OBS has been working with NVIDIA to try and make the recording and rendering quality to be as high as possible. So that's why I wanted to upgrade from my 1080 Ti to the 2080 Ti. Now, putting these in is very simple. Once you've taken the back plate off the case, make sure it's unlocked on the motherboard, the PCI slot's unlocked, and it slots right in and it clicks. Once it clicks, just make sure it's screwed in. You actually have to take two back plates off because they've got a double backspace of how much room they take up. And yeah, you screw it in, and that's pretty much everything you need to do for actually putting it into the computer. And then you'll see how I just put the spacer in here. Now, when you put the spacer in, I actually would not even bother putting this in until you finish building the entire PC. As well as good as it is that holds up some of that weight, it did fall out a few times during the rest of the PC build, and I would just suggest leaving it out until you finish building the rest of the computer and then chuck it in at the end. But because I hadn't seen one of these before, I actually wanted to play around with it, and yeah, that's why it took me so long to figure out how exactly I wanted to use it. Now, the next thing, and pretty much the final thing required to get this computer up and running, is putting in a power supply. So PSUs, a lot of people go like, I need the 1000 watt, the 1200 watt PSU. It really doesn't need to be that much power unless you're running like a slice setup. So you've got two 2080 Ti's. There are so many good websites out there that actually tell you how much power you're going to use under max load and on a standard running load. You put in the computer that you're going to be buying, and it will tell you exactly how much power you need. Then what I would suggest is you go and look up the rating of power supplies, and then buy it based off the rating. So generally it's under like the efficiency title. They'll have anywhere from like bronze, silver, gold, platinum, titanium. And I selected this one as it was a platinum, which is the second best efficiency for a power supply. As with the other Corsair products, if they have the eye at the back of it, you have the access to using the IQ application program, and then you can change your power settings and affect your power supply and find out what's going on and how much power you're actually using in live time through actual windows, which is really handy to have. Now, with modular power supplies as well, usually come with a bag, and all those inside the bag, they'll have all the different cables you can use. So on the actual power supply itself, there won't be any cables, and you can just pick out which cables you need for the actual build of your computer, and you only put those ones into the power supply. Now, this is really good for keeping it nice and tidy. It's really annoying when you go out, buy something later on and you're like, I'll just chuck in one extra cable, and then you got to try and get your hand inside the case to get that extra cable in. So it's kind of double-edged in that way, but if you build the computer right the first time, you could even probably leave one cable plugged in if you're ever thinking about expanding into a certain direction with, say, I don't know, an extra SATA drive or something like that. You can have an extra SATA cable there ready to go. So once you start plugging in all the cables, I'd plug all the cables you need in, get them all like aside, make sure you've got everything you're going to need for the build, chuck it all in, and then you'll need to slot it into the case. Now, every case is different. Some cases will let you slide them in from the side, the back, and all that. You will need to screw in the power supply as well. But I usually leave that till the very end, have all the cables plugged in, because if you need to take something out or put an extra cable in, you don't want to have to keep ripping out this power supply in and out while you're doing that. The cable lengths are generally quite long now these days as well, giving you plenty of reach to be able to make your cable management nice and tidy using the back of the case. Now, once you've got your power supply in, it's time to start chucking all your cables through. Using the back of the case, you'll start feeding them through, making sure all the fans have power, the graphics card has power. With a 2080 Ti, it does require you to have two power cables into it. We did do the research after building the computer. Originally, we had it all off the one cable, so we had two plugged in off the one cable, and we did the research, and some people found there was power lackages or shortages because of that, and so we decided later on after the filming was finished to actually feed through a second cable and have two individual cables onto a 2080 Ti. I think that would come down to trial and error. Sometimes it might not work, sometimes it will, but I think overall, better safe than sorry. So if you do have the extra cables, make sure you put two cables into your GPU. After that, make sure you go through, plug in all your powers throughout all the motherboard and your graphics card fans. You'll need SATA cables generally for the fans these days. That's how they get powered. And then the most annoying part I find in building a computer is generally plugging in the power reset switch and all that. This motherboard came with a little adapter that was absolutely amazing. You plug in all your little like power reset, all the HD LEDs, all those switches into the actual little module, and then you plug that module straight into the motherboard. It's the first motherboard I've seen that has it. I'm sure there's plenty of other ones out there, but they blew my mind. So when I built my last computer about 12-18 months ago, that was not there, and I had a pretty similar computer or value motherboard for that. Other things you're going to have to plug in is stuff like your USB 3 cables and all that kind of stuff. You just got to take it slow. You got to go through every single individual cable from the box of the motherboard and the case, and then slowly link them up. Otherwise, you won't have all those plugs at the front of your case to be able to plug in from there. So as you can see here, I'm plugging in all the cables in the back of the computer. There is a shitload going around everywhere. Some of them are part of the fans assembly up the top. That was all plugged in, and then I was plugging in the ones for the reset and power switch. They all go down via the bottom. Cable management is sometimes a really important thing to some people. Sometimes it's not. You can have cables going throughout your case everywhere. It comes down to how neat and tidy you want it to look. But it does look really nice when you finally do have a computer together with all the cables hidden. With this case, it was very cramped at the back because I had so much inside this case. But it's totally worth it in the end. So once it's all together, you got all the cables plugged in, you go for the inevitable turn on. Now, I didn't actually plug this into a monitor on the first turn on just to see if it was work. I just wanted to make sure all the lights came on. There was no error codes on the motherboard, and yeah, it just make sure it worked to everyone. I actually did want to change a few things around just to make it a little bit neat and tidier, and that was all going to be like little finicky stuff that would take probably another half an hour or so, and I didn't want to prolong people on the stream watching this, so I finished it up here on the actual recording. But as you can see, everything lit up and it's all working nice and tidy. So I end up chucking on all the sides and the front and the back and the top of the case, making it all nice and neat. And now I have the computer that I use every day for my streams and editing, which I'm extremely happy for. So before I finish up this video, I do want to say a massive shout out again to Gigabyte and Corsair. Guys, if you are interested in buying their products, I'll have links down below to the products I had for this build. And I have had no issues ever with both Corsair and Gigabyte. There's a reason why I reached out to both of them, and that is in the past I've had other companies' products, and if I have had warranty issues, you know, like I've sent it back and that. But lucky to me, the last 3 graphics cards that I had, including this one now, have all been Gigabyte. Everything's worked to a treat, to a really high standard, and that means a lot to me, and that's why I reached out to them. And then also Corsair, probably the leading in their products for nearly everything that they do, which is amazing because they do some really great products, and I've been using Corsair products now for a while. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. There was a lot of me just explaining the process of building a computer, and some people will just be like, yeah, this is straightforward, no shit. But I've been building computers now since I was probably about 12 years old, and I'm 32 and 3/4 now, so I'm getting pretty old, and I know my shit. I feel like I know my shit. So guys, if you have any questions, you know, down in the comments below, feel free to hit me up anytime. Otherwise, I do stream on Twitch every single day of the week, so go down the link below, give me a follow over on Twitch. More than happy to discuss any of the questions that you might have with building your computer, or my community can help out. I do have a very active Discord, 8,500 people. If you are building a computer and you need help, I'm sure there's someone on Discord that would be more than willing to help you out as well. So guys, thanks for watching the video. And lastly, I'll see you next time.